Just when you think the Syria conflict can't get any worse, Turkey goes and leaks secret locations of U.S. troops within northern Syria. So this comes from an article from the Daily Beast. In the latest display of Turkish anger at U.S. policy in Syria, the state news agency has divulged the locations of 10 U.S. military bases and outposts in northern Syria, where the U.S. is leading an operation to destroy the so-called Islamic State in its self-styled capital of Raqqa. The list published by the Anadolu news agency points to a U.S. presence from one end to the other of the Kurdish self-administration region, a distance of more than 200 miles. The Anadolu news agency even listed the number of U.S. troops in several locations, and in 2 instances stipulated the presence of French special forces. So what Turkey did here, they've been getting increasingly pissed off at the U.S.'s support of the Kurds, which are basically the Turks' mortal enemy. The Kurds have been labeled a terrorist organization by Turkey and have been, over the past few years, conducting terrorist attacks against Turkey. And so Turkey is allied with the U.S., the Kurds are allied with the U.S., and they're both kind of pissed at each other, and pissed at the U.S. for supporting their enemies, basically. And so, yeah, Turkey's like to strike back at the U.S. They go and they reveal 10 locations of military bases and the numbers of troops there, which is damaging, very damaging, and really threatens the lives of the people who are stationed there. Turkey has openly criticized the Trump administration and the Obama administration before it for relying in the battle against ISIS on a militia led by Kurds affiliated with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. A separatist movement now at war with Turkey, the PKK has been listed by the US, EU, and Turkey as a terror organization. So not only does Turkey consider them a terror organization, but so does Europe and the US. And hey, the US is even supporting them, so it's true when people say the US do support terror organizations. We openly support them, and we openly call them terrorist organizations. To avoid the appearance of allying with such a group, except that the US is, so you can't really shake that, the U.S. military set up the Syrian Democratic Forces, which have a large component of Arab recruits, but they are led by officers from the People's Protection Units, YPG, the Syrian affiliate of the PKK. So it's basically just the PKK in disguise in Syria. Officers from the PKK are leading these forces, so like it says, it's a Syrian affiliate of it. Although Turkey's powerful president, Erdogan, regularly vents his anger at the US, it is still highly unusual for a NATO ally to reveal details of a US military deployment during active operations in a war zone. Yeah, it is very unusual, but you're talking about Turkey here, and Erdogan. You know, the guys who threatened to send millions of more refugees into Europe to destabilize the continent. They're not exactly reasonable folk. But the U.S. operation in Syria is in many respects an unusual case. Not only is the United States acting against the express wishes of a NATO ally, Turkey, which says its national security is directly endangered, it's also operating without the permission of the Assad regime. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, that in Assad's sovereign nation of Syria, the U.S. has set up military bases when it claims it's like kind of at war, but not really at war, but you know, we're gonna send a small amount of troops in there, but you know what, let's up that a little bit. Hey, now we're sending in people to assist Syrian rebel forces. No, we're actually taking direct action now. Well, we can shell them. No, let's send troops in. America. It's a clusterfuck. And this is happening within Assad's own sovereign nation. But let's be real, the U.S. doesn't care about the sovereignty of nations, especially in the Middle East. After a meeting Monday evening, Turkey's National Security Council charged that weapons provided to the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia had come into the possession of the PKK. This shows that both are the same organization, it said, adding that other countries were using a double standard for terror groups, an apparent reference to the U.S. alliance with the YPJ militia. That's true, yeah. It is kind of a double standard, but the U.S. really entangles itself in these ridiculous instances in order to further its own goals in the Middle East. The U.S. has denied repeatedly that arms it is supplying to the Kurdish fighters have seeped into the PKK war against the Turkish state, and the Turkish government did not back up its allegations with evidence. Yeah, but you have to know what happened. If these two groups are affiliated, and one group is receiving weapons, but both are pretty much supported, well, of course, they're going to be used in the war effort against Turkey. Skipping ahead, the 8 outposts, often hidden behind signs warning a prohibited area, are being used both for active military operations such as shelling into the city of Raqqa and for desk jobs such as training and operational planning, the report said. The claim bases used for military operations house artillery batteries with high maneuverability, multi-barrel rocket launchers, various mobile equipment for intelligence, and armored vehicles for general patrols and security. In Hasaka province, the U.S. has 3 outposts, all used to train Kurdish militia members, according to Turkish security officials. Anadolu even gave the number of U.S. Special Forces troops it believed were stationed at 2 of the 3 outposts. Now that's some sensitive information right there. Giving out the number of troops that are in a base in an active war zone like that, that's fucked. Skipping ahead again, in Manbij, which the Kurdish YPG militia captured last August, the U.S. now has 2 outposts. The U.S. sends out patrols, the agency noted, acerbilically, to protect the Kurdish People's Protection Unit forces from Syrian rebels operating out of the Turkish-controlled part of Syria known as the Jarablus Pocket. It's funny, I wonder who those Syrian rebels are. I mean, the article makes a distinction between Syrian rebels and ISIS, so I'm going to assume these are U.S.-backed Syrian rebels. So not only is the U.S. allies with Turks and the Kurds, who are mortal enemies, they are supporting the Syrian rebel forces, who are enemies with the Kurds, and so the U.S. is trying to keep all 3 of these, in check in the area, while Russian and Syrian government forces are in close proximity. This is a mess. Okay, and moving on to the source of this leak from a Turkish news website. So this is titled, U.S. increases military posts supporting PKK-PYD in Syria. And in the other article, a U.S. military official said to the Daily Beast, please do not publish the numbers of troops in the area that are located in northern Syria and in these military bases. So this article right here does have some numbers of U.S. Special Forces and French Special Forces located at these bases, so I'm going to censor those, but the full article will be available in the description. The U.S. has increased the number of military posts in the terrorist PKK-PYD-held Syrian territories to 10. According to Anadolu agency reporters, a U.S. military point has recently been established in PKK-PYD-held areas in northern Syria. Washington had set up 2 air bases in PKK-PYD-held Ramilan district in the northeastern of Al-Hasaka province in October 2015 and Harab Isk village in southern Kobani in March 2016. While a part of the U.S. military aid to PKK-PYD goes through Iraqi border by land, the other part is shipped to the region through the Ramilan Air Base. These field-type military points are usually hidden for security reasons, making it hard to be detected, according to Anadolu agency reporters. Apart from the military points, the U.S. also uses some other places which are hard to be detected, like residential areas, PKK-PYD camps, easily transformed factories as operational points. So this is like the end of the article, skipping all the sensitive information. PYD, the Syrian offshoot of the terrorist organization PKK, is in control of Al-Hasaka in the east, northern Raqqa, Manbij to the east of Aleppo, Afrin, and Tal Rifat districts. Recognized by the U.S. as an ally in the fight against Daesh, which is ISIS, PKK-PYD militants run under the name of the Syrian Democratic Forces in the war-torn country, but they're essentially the same thing. Despite the fact that the militants were given SDF uniforms, some of them wear uniforms with banners of Abdullah Öcalan, jailed head of the PKK terrorist organization in Turkey. So for a while now, we've known that the U.S. has had troops in Syria, but we never really knew the extent of it. I never knew that there were actual constructed military bases in northern Syria, let alone 10 of them. And this just adds to the whole mess of the situation, because now, after this leak, ISIS is going to pick up on it, and other terrorist groups, and, well, now they know where these places are located, the number of people there, it'll help them militarily, and will endanger the lives of the people stationed there. So I'm going to head over to an article from Time.com, and this is an old article from March 12th, but it does give some context to U.S. troop presence in Syria. This article is titled, "The U.S. troop presence in Syria is at its highest ever, But how long are they on the ground for, and why? Recent comments from U.S. officials suggest that the military is contemplating a deployment in Syria that extends far beyond the defeat of ISIS as a conventional armed force. In his testimony to the Senate Armed Services Committee on March 9th, Army General Joseph Votel, who leads the U.S. Central Command, said additional forces may be needed in the future to help with stability and other aspects of the operations. So what U.S. officials are saying is if they send military forces into Syria, if they have mass troop deployment in Syria, it's going to have to extend beyond just taking out ISIS. And what they're saying is we're going to take out Assad too, because the US government doesn't like Assad. And see, this is pretty dangerous to say, and I think this is why mass troop deployment hasn't really been enacted yet, because if you do this, we could go in there, it would be extremely difficult, but we could probably lessen the extent of ISIS in the region. But once you do that, once you have the US military in the sovereign nation of Syria, you're gonna have to deal with Assad and his Syrian government forces. But Assad is backed by Russia, and this is where it gets bad, because this whole region is a boiling point for World War III. So any major military action should be met with extreme scrutiny and should be thought about very, very intently. The near doubling of U.S. military deployment in eastern Syria, along with Votel's comments, suggests a shift toward a more open-ended commitment of forces to Syria, echoing the prolonged U.S. military presence in Iraq or Afghanistan. But the escalation is also prompting calls to define the objectives of the mission over the long term in order to avoid a costly occupation both in terms of lives and resources. That's true, we haven't really been giving objectives, so to say, for Operation Inherent Resolve, the military operation to take out ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And with the establishment of 10 military bases now leaked by the Turks, I think our presence is going to be more permanent in the region, and will just further contribute to this fucking mess. Inevitably, there will be American casualties, and there needs to be an executable plan for post-conflict governance that keeps the Assad regime, the main reason for violent extremism in Syria, out of areas liberated from ISIS, says Fred Hoff, former special advisor to the Obama administration on Syria. Yeah, there are going to be American casualties, especially if you keep increasing these military forces in the regions. And of course, they're already thinking in the long term. Once we kill ISIS, we're gonna have to take care of Assad. And look, they even blame him. They say he's the reason for the violent extremism in Syria. That may be true partially, but it's ISIS, it's jihadism, it's these horrible terrorist groups going around butchering civilians. And honestly, in the eyes of the Syrian people, Assad's the good guy. To the US, our media paints him out to be the devil, sort of like Saddam Hussein, but he may do some shitty things and is practically a dictator, but would you rather him, a secular dictator who brings stability to his country, or these religious fanatics plunging the country into chaos? There is no good solution to this problem, but you need to pick the most practical one. The only reason we're not supporting Assad is because we want all these Middle Eastern countries under our control, because a lot of them had ties to the Soviet Union, and with Syria and its close relationship with Russia, it's tough, The U.S. goal, as said by some general back in the 90s, I don't exactly remember his name, but I remember seeing it. He said the U.S. goal for the Middle East is to basically get it under its control so we can stand up against Russia. It's still kind of a superpower. So we can exert control over the Middle East and get rid of all that ex-Soviet bullshit. And here we're still dealing with it nearly 30 years later. U.S. forces should not segue into an occupational role, but it requires careful planning and intensive diplomacy to avoid sliding into something unintended. The article goes on to say, U.S. forces are in Syria with the ostensible intention of helping Kurdish-dominated Syrian militias retake the city of Raqqa, the de facto capital of the Islamic State. U.S. Marines are already deployed near Raqqa, firing artillery in support of that campaign. The current approach mirrors the U.S.-backed fight against the Islamic State in Iraq, where American air power, special operations forces, and the U.S. Army and Marines play a supporting role for a coalition of tens of thousands of Iraqi troops. More than 5,000 U.S. personnel are currently deployed in Iraq, fighting in support of the Iraqi government soldiers and police, allied militia groups, and Iraqi Kurdish forces. So in Iraq right now, it's pretty much, we're at war. That's really no secret. They say we're in a supporting role, but that still means we're fighting alongside these forces against ISIS. When these news outlets say that, U.S. forces they're just advising roles in Syria. Oh no, they're just shelling areas. That may be true to an extent, but you know that the US government is sending out special forces and even regular Marine forces to fight battles directly with these terrorists. It's just we're not being told about it. So yeah, we are in Syria. We are directly fighting ISIS. But the whole diplomacy and all that stuff, the US government denies it. But it's most certainly happening. And with these whole Turkey leaks, well, this is gonna inflame tensions between the US and Turkey. But, like, tensions are rising heavily between us, and this is a bold move by Turkey, I gotta say. Erdogan's got some balls for doing this. Now we just gotta see how the US government responds. Here's another thing. US support for the Kurdish militias infuriates Turkish officials. It also alienates some of Syria's Arab citizens, who could view Kurdish militias as an occupying force. It's always the civilians that get the blunt end of this. It sucks. Human rights groups have documented the group razing villages and forcing Arab Syrians to flee. U.S. officials envisioned sending the Arab-led units of the broader SDF coalition into Raqqa, but Turkish officials and Syrian opposition activists are not convinced this is a sound plan. Yeah, because just like any other terrorist group, which the Kurds are, they've been documented doing horrible things to these villages that they raid, or, quote-unquote free. They raise them, they burn them for no military reason at all, and just leave the people displaced. Like, you get rid of ISIS, and then the Kurds come in, burn down your shit, and then what? Like, you're pretty much in the same situation. So it's like, it's no wonder the Turks hate them. Well, the US supports both sides. It's all so confusing. It's so hard to keep track of, and this can only lead to something worse. This situation is troubling, it's very problematic, and it can only get worse. You got like I've said before, you got the US, it's trying too hard to exert its dominance and further its goals in the region, and it's supporting so many groups that hate each other, plus dancing around with Russian troops in the region. This is only gonna be bad. If you thought Syria couldn't get worse, well, just be prepared, because now you're gonna have inflamed Turkish and US relations. What else is new? Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. If you like the video, please like, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, share if you want other people to see this, and if you want updates on when my videos are released, tap that little bell if you're subscribed, and you'll get instant notifications of when I upload a shitty video like this one. Once again, thank you all, and I hope to see you next time.